Okay, thank you everyone for joining our session today, which focuses on new developments in rodent control. We're very lucky to have a leading expert in rodent control with us today, Dr. Bobby Corrigan. Dr. Corrigan is a renowned rodentologist and has been involved in the science of pest control for more than 30 years. He taught classes on rodentology at Purdue University for 16 years and also conducted research which really revolutionized rodent pest management. He has authored numerous research papers and textbooks and has also been featured on many national publications. He was inducted into the Pest Control Hall of Fame in 2008. Dr. Corrigan's session this afternoon will give us a look into rodent behaviors and how you can use that knowledge to identify, prevent, and eliminate rodent infestations in multifamily housing. Please submit any questions you have, and we'll do our best to answer these throughout the session. And Dr. Corrigan, I'm going to go on mute and I will let you take it from here.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon to everybody. So as you just heard, we're going to talk about rodents and rodent control in public and affordable housing. I'm going to address it in kind of a three-pronged approach. We need to talk about risks that we know through new research and rodents inside apartment buildings. We need to pretty much outline what are our needs, considering the risks and considering the complexity of rodents inside apartment buildings, and what kinds of solutions are available to us as technology develops and techniques develop and we go forth. So I'm going to jump right in. I do want to say thanks. It's an honor to be asked to present to this group. I think this is a critical topic, and one, in my opinion, that over the years probably has not been addressed in any kind of great detail. So I do want to say thanks to HAI and also to Cornell with Susanna Reese, working as an IPM specialist, and all the work Stop Pest does in housing. So this is not a session of the biology and behavior of rodents, right? Obviously, these animals, you can get almost everything you need very quickly right off the internet. But suffice to say, I'm going to, just introduce them as you're looking at this animal. Rodents comprise 43% of all the mammals on planet Earth. 43% of all mammals belong to the rodent group. The reason I stress that is you don't get to be that prevalent around the entire globe unless actually you have a lot going for you. And so when they get into apartment buildings of any style, everything from the super duper high-end condominiums that overlook our cities, all the way back through the process of sometimes small apartment buildings themselves, this animal knows how to take advantage of those buildings and those operations, and also the conundrums and the problems we face sometimes with trying to operate multifamily housing under today's conditions in cities. So they're quite successful. And, right now, in addition to what I just mentioned, the global rodent population, and I travel all around the world on these animals, the global population is up with a capital U. And there's lots of reasons for that. Again, going into great detail we don't have time for, but it's not as simple as, global warming. It's not as simple as rodents are becoming immune to the poisons. It's a complex situation, but in general, the rodents are doing very well from all around the entire globe, from Europe to Asia, South America, and North America. So it's a situation where our work is cut out for us. And I want to approach it from that aspect of there's nothing simple about control with these rodents. We can't put out a bunch of bait boxes around an apartment complex at the foundation and say, we're controlling the rodents. It's far from that. So I do want to at least state the three species that, in priority order, that threaten affordable housing and public housing. It's by far number one is the mouse, the ordinary mouse, the house mouse. Number two, in some cities, and I'm speaking to you from the New York City area, my hometowns, but we also have the brown rat, and then in some parts of the United States, you may be involved with cities that have black rats as well. And the black rat usually occurs from Seattle all the way back down to Virginia along the coastal areas, and it's not as much on the interior of the country, with some exceptions. But those are our big three. And again, this is not a biology lesson. We just want to show that, you know, the rodents are standard animals that we're all familiar with. You know, I think every single person anywhere has had some experience, at least with a house mouse invading their properties somewhere along the line in your lives, right? So the house mouse is everybody. It's ubiquitous. And the rats are somewhat on the increase in most cities, and the roof rat is somewhat holding its own, is not becoming prolific as much as our friend the Noe rat, also the brown rat. So this is our friend, the house mouse. I'm very intimate with this particular mammal. I've done a lot of work at the university over the years with this animal. It's important to recognize, in addition to everything I just said, is you're actually looking at the second, number 2, most successful mammal on planet Earth. This is number 2 of all things. People are surprised when you ask people about what's impressive animals on the planet. Usually the glorious animals come to mind, and people say, oh, I think whales are very cool, and I like wolves, and you know, you get the glitzy Hollywood style mammals, but nobody mentions the mouse. It's so overlooked as just a ubiquitous pest. But this is number 2. And by the way, we claim to be in the number 1 spot, human beings, sapiens. We're claiming that number 1 spot. I don't know. Sometimes I read the newspaper and I think, holy cow, should we be at number 1? Are we the most successful, or what? But nevertheless, that's the order. So there's our friend, the real deal, not a laboratory animal. This is the real deal. City Norway rat or brown rat, for obvious reasons, right? It's a very stout, very formidable animal. They frighten a lot of people, as we're going to mention in a second. But it's an animal that has a greater presence and a greater attention to everybody in the press and the media, much more than the mouse. And that's that roof rat. That's the third guy. Occurs along the coastal areas. It's kind of a very cool mammal. Notice how long that tail is. That long tail. It does not do well in the cold regions of the United States, and partly because that long tail dissipates the heat. And they're always cold, so they prefer the warm, semi-tropical kinds of regions. So, of course, we end up with, you know, affordable housing complexes, public housing complexes of all different shapes and sizes. I work with Rutgers University quite a bit on research, still am. We're still doing grants and papers and what have you. And, you know, the building from the outside, most people, when they look at an apartment building such as this, which is affordable housing, they don't really understand how it all is built and how it operates and what's the infrastructure and all these kinds of things. But you put a mouse inside a building like this, and if you started with one female that's pregnant and it's not managed correctly over time, the mouse will try to get in as many of the units as possible, as well as the walls of the building itself, the envelope itself. And so they become very, very numerous very quickly under typical conditions. And it varies according to the styles of the buildings. You know, there's a lot of variance, as everyone perhaps on this seminar knows. You can go from all different kinds of affordable housing complexes, some with, and I show this, with crawl spaces. There's an access to the crawl space right there in the center of the photograph with the access door. I was just in that specific crawl space 2 weeks ago, doing an inspection and analysis of a problem and so forth. So literally is a crawl space, and everything in between, right, is subcontracted out, and various associated properties of all different shapes and sizes, right? So including sometimes some of significant height, which is another concern of how much refuse is generated in multifamily housing complexes of all types, affordable and public housing, like I mentioned earlier, and or up to fancy condo buildings. But one thing's for sure, inside buildings that have multiple floors, we have complexity with plumbing trees and heating duct trees and garbage chutes and so forth and so on, and millions, literally millions of nooks and crannies, especially for the mouse, where they can hide and nest up and stay away from us as much as possible. So when we look at putting that together with rodents, there's multiple risks. First, probably everybody on this seminar knows that, rodent urine and feces is associated with important allergens. In fact, the mouse, as you'll see, that mouse I talked about, one mouse in 24 hours can urinate 3,000 microdroplets of urine in 24 hours. Now, it's not true that they don't have bladders, and it's not true that they can't control it. They do control it. They do have bladders, but they communicate through the urine, believe it or not. It's the number one social means of communication in mice is through the urine. And that urine contains urinary proteins. In fact, the technical term is mouse urinary proteins. And those proteins, just like other cockroach proteins, in some cases for certain children, peanut proteins, cause allergens. They also carry pathogens, disease organisms, bacteria, viral, and several others. And, we've done research out of Columbia University in New York City, out of Dr. Ian Lipkin, the famous virologist, where he's collected mice throughout the city and rats throughout the city and run tests on them, and they're carrying, right? Of course, they carry parasites themselves. They carry fleas, they carry ticks, they carry mites, mites, they carry lice, lice. So those, as mice travel and nest up inside kitchens and basements and nooks and crannies, those parasites can get off the rodents from time to time and crawl about looking for people to bite and attack. Of course, we have rat bites to children. Just a very recent case, I was brought in to consult for is in the Midwest, where children were bitten in their home something like 60 times while they were sleeping. And the parents just thought, well, they're going to have to learn to go to sleep. And the rats were literally attacking them. So this happens from time to time. They contaminate our food, constantly. The rat and the mouse defecating, urinating, shedding hairs, saliva, so forth. So none of us want rodents in our kitchens. None of us want rodents anywhere intimate with us, such as an apartment. Certainly nobody wants to eat in a restaurant. If you saw a rat run across the floor or even a mouse, you'd get up and leave. So we don't want to ingest any of their contaminants. And of course, they also gnaw, or we'll use the term chew. Everybody gets the term chew, right? They can chew on wires, and pretty important wires. They can chew on electrical systems of stoves, refrigerators. If it's a gas copper line, the rat can penetrate a copper line with its teeth. It exerts pressure. It's 7,000 pounds per square inch and bites 6 bites per second. So, rodents around wiring is dangerous. And they have burned buildings down. I've taken rats off airplanes. I don't want to fly with knowing that a rodent that's chewing on wires is above my head in the airplane seat, right? So none of us would. And finally, they cause us tremendous psychological stress. So, it's worse than someone saying, oh, yikes, a mouse, or yuck, I hear rats in the walls. This can really affect us in a very deep way. So they're public health pests, right? That's the bottom line. The risks are there. In my opinion, having studied various pests, not just rodents, but I think rodents are far more important as public health pests, than than are the cockroaches, with their allergens. And bed bugs aren't a public health pest, but they certainly are a public health nuisance kind of animal. So you don't have to go far to get, quality research and the refereed journals associated with that research. And or, if you want, the popular science publications like Scientific American, they'll summarize it for us. So the study that Columbia did just a couple of years ago, their headline after they got done analyzing the refereed paper was, as you can see, New York City mice are packed. Very careful with their headlines, by the way. Headline editors have to be very careful with which adjectives they use and words, but they're packed with pathogens. Now, this got a lot of press, but 2 years before this, we could actually substitute and say New York City rats were also packed with pathogens. In fact, many of the pathogens were very, very similar across those species, which makes actually perfect sense. So our little buddy here, the house mouse, I took this picture in the middle of the night, chasing mice around apartments, and I just followed them whatever they were doing in an apartment before we went ahead with a full-scale pest management program. But they did the typical thing, in the morning, there was no label left on that oatmeal box. They stripped the label completely off. The next night, they took all the soup labels off. So, and on top of that, they're urinating on top of those cans. They're urinating onto that cardboard, which absorbs the urine. So that's in a kitchen cabinet right there, as you can see. And that animal is doing its thing, disappearing below the cabinet for its own nest. So as I mentioned, I think it's important for everybody to realize the magnitude of what we're up against with just a mouse, right? If I focus on our number one guy. And this is based on good research, qualitative research, statistically valid research. It's not an estimate. These are counts that can be measured, in laboratories, 3,000 per 24 hours, mouse urinary proteins. The damages, this is mouse damage, right here when I took this picture, I'm below a dishwasher, and which had been sparking and malfunctioning and so forth and so on. And people talked about mice. And down below, all that wire stripping you see is rodents gnawing on wires. You'll notice all their droppings down there as well, and all the urine stains. They love, as you're going to see, they love appliances to move into them, to live behind them, beneath them. And any wires, and they attack wires because they look like plant stems to them. That's their origin, is living in Asia among plant stems by thousands of miles. So any wires attract rodents with their teeth. So of course, when mice and rats, but especially with mice, when they're about, they're scurrying all over the place. If you sit up, when I was working on my PhD, I would stay up all night with rodents in real world scenarios and just watch them and take their pictures and use video and so forth. And you will see they visit all our spots. They're curious animals and what have you, but nobody's getting up in the morning blacklighting their apartments to see, well, where was the mouse? Where was the rat? What did they visit? But the answer is very unsettling. It's like they were all over the appliances, the plates, the toys, the silverware, the clothing, sometimes the beds. They're every place. So, and those are the places we're constantly touching, of course. And all of us are just coming through the pandemic, right? Or still virus conscious about the pandemic. We know now the importance of how our hands and fingers can touch viruses. And then we touch our hands, touch our face, so forth. Or, what's in our little scraps of food that we thought was safe during the night sitting on the counter. So it's a public health pest by every stretch. And, with the house mouse and the rat, but with the house mouse, it carries a very common mite called the tropical rat mite. Even though it's a mouse, it carries tropical rat mites. It also carries its own house mouse mite. So these can carry diseases themselves, the ectoparasites, in this case, rickettsia, a disease, like rickettsia typhus. So it's a serious issue. And just to show you, that again, we have a pest and a pest on top of the pest. So the house mouse mite, that's common, that'll attack and bite people and causing people to be itchy and dermatitis. And, you're trying to just relax within your own nest and read a book or go to sleep or take a nap. And it's very disturbing that you're itching because something is embedded into your skin. So psychologically, these animals and their animals, can really get to us. And to that point, a really outstanding paper was published. It was quantitatively measuring the psychological impact of rodents that have, their impact on us, right? And the names at the bottom there, the authors, Byers, Cox, Lamb, Hemsworth, 2019, those are among the top epidemiologists and rodentologists in the world, based out of British Columbia in Vancouver region. And, this was, measured carefully, and you can see that cause fear, anger, stress, worry, exhaustion, sleep disturbance, avoidance behaviors, even where you're just kind of whacked out. And I would dare say anyone on this webinar and anyone that's been in an apartment where above your head in the ceiling, you hear scrabbling noises of an animal that's running back and forth right above your head in the ceiling. It's going to be very difficult for you to sleep, for any person to sleep, which we know the importance, ramifications there. Because behind the scenes, right, and this is from cams I've shot over the years, but on the other side of the walls, in apartment complexes and buildings of all time, those animals use our pipes and our infrastructure and our lines and our structures to travel up, down, sideways, in every single direction, making noise and leaving contaminants and gnawing on objects. So, if you're sitting reading a book in the living room and you hear something chewing on the wall, it's really going to upset anybody. To the point of, this is, and in fairness, this is not affordable housing. This absolutely is the other end, to be frank, but it shows how distressed this person, this is a super high-end apartment complex, and actually, quite a very, very famous person who went to use their toilet in their own apartment building, and they went to sit down on the toilet. At the same time, a rat was trying to get up out of the toilet, which is not rare. It's not rare. It happens periodically from time to time. And so they were so frightened, they took it upon themselves to I'm going to catch this rat the very next time it tries to get out of this toilet bowl. And that, I don't know how they used the toilet thereafter, I guess, but probably the alternate two toilets they had. But the rat did come out of this, believe it or not, got onto and jumped over that barrier and ran around dragging dirty water and what have you, and ended up in other rooms. So people they lose it. They lose it completely when they feel like they're being invaded. And speaking of that word, we need to look at, and get rid of some myths about how rodents get into our apartment buildings, and particularly affordable housing buildings, to be frank. And, there's all kinds of statements that are made that, you can't keep them out because they flatten out their bodies and they have special joints and their bones are soft. All of that is myth, what I just said, right? But there is some validity to it. Doesn't take much space to let them in. So this is an affordable housing building in the downstairs delivery area and back room, classic of any big apartment building, wherever it is. But of course, you see the doors and you see all those light leaks, and those doors, relative to rodents, are 24/7, 365 open. There might as well not be a single door on that room. Now, it's keeping out raccoons, and it's keeping out deer, and it's keeping out humans, but rodents do not even have to duck to get below those doors. So, the average mouse only needs 6 millimeters, which is quarter of an inch, and a rat needs 12 millimeters, which is half an inch, and that's it. And so they can't flatten out. But once they put their head below something that's 6 or 12, they can do the limbo, and often that's what they do. They go through like a limbo if you watch them, and they'll use their tail and dance around, and before you know it, they're in. And it gives the impression they're flat as if you watch it, but they're not flat. They cannot flatten out. This is out of my own textbook. This is, had the illustrator. There's a ruler on the left. It just said, show how once this head gets through, which is 6 millimeters high for house mouse, the body is the rib cage. They have the same skeletal as us, same skeleton, right? They have feet. They have, just stand this animal up. It's a mammal. So, a land mammal. But back here's all soft tissue, just like with us, below our rib cage, soft tissue, down to the hips. Here's the hips, and they go through. And once they get that done, and this is a mouse. I was laying on the floor to take these pictures, but this is a mouse entering an apartment complex night after night after night. Different mice were coming in. And the reason that's important is once the first mouse gets into an apartment, either through the downstairs or through a pipe, a mouse entry begets mouse entry because they leave pheromones. They put down a scent out of that urine, and you see these black smudges above the head of the mouse as he's coming towards me. He was entering right towards me, and and they were coming on a regular basis to get to some garbage smells. But once the first one's in, that is what I call long rodent. We're all familiar with long COVID, but that building is now marked long rodent. Forever after, once it's been infected like that, rodents will find that same door again. All their brethren will find that same door, and it'll go on and on and on, reinforcing until we pest proof that correctly. So here's a team I was just working with, and this is a affordable housing kind of entry to one side of the building, but you can see it actually begins with something as simple as fix the doors. It's amazing how many times in my career, people come out and say, look, we'll get an exterminator. We'll tell them to put out some bait boxes and by the door, and that'll take care of it. Or they'll put out a trap by the door. I'm like, no, let's fix the door. It's not expensive, relatively speaking. We can do this, and weather stripping will not keep them out. So up close is just, that's long ago. Weather stripping has never been replaced in itself, never replaced. And it's gappy as can be. And by the way, to the left there of that door, you'll see all those staining. That's from rats and mice visiting corners. They love corners. They urinate there. They travel about. And on the right hand, you'll see a big blob of foam, which, as I'll talk about, is the worst thing anybody can try to do to keep rodents out is a foam blob. I put this in because not too long ago myself, I was traveling, going somewhere. I stayed at a hotel overnight. Sure enough, I put down my backpack on the left there. I turn around, I look at my own hotel door, and there's a mouse hole in the bottom right. Of all rooms he picks mine. And I said, I'm going to find if he's living with me. I want to see this. So I kind of took that room apart, much like we do these days for bed bugs. But for me, I take rooms apart to see if mice are with me. There it is up close, and there's mouse hair stuck all over that. And I put down a chocolate Hershey bar to there. I had this little snack, and I said, let's see during the night if they come in and attack my Hershey bar. The next morning, the Hershey bar was completely gone, the whole thing. I had only taken one piece of it. There was a party in my room that night before, and all the mice were coming in, feeding and grabbing the chocolate and running back out to their nest. This is Dr. Matt Fry from Cornell, who's also very active in rodent control and rodent research. And we work together on mouse proofing situations and the complexity of rodent proofing and so forth. But here he's pointing to what's called the astrogal, the space between two double doors. This property, which actually in this case was high end, and they said, well, there's no gaps beneath our door. We're like, that's right, there's no gaps beneath your door, but you can let rats in through between the doors. So unless you do that, it doesn't matter the rest of the door. Again, you might as well leave it wide open 24/7. It is that way. So this is weather stripping incorrectly approved. And again, the folks that put these on feel like, hey, we got it covered. But I took these pictures, all these pictures you see is because it was rodent related eventually. So once inside, then the rodents begin to learn their way about up, down, sideways in all areas. They use the plumbing tree, the garbage chute tree, the heating tree, cabling tree. It's all, vertical risers and utility chases, and they will go from floor to floor. Sometimes you will find rodents up on floor number 16 and nobody on the base floor. And people say, how come the first floor doesn't have an infestation? Well, it's because that first animal that gets in, if it goes traveling that night and finds a really good apartment with food that should have been cleaned up or not, they'll set up shop and the pheromones will call all the other rodents to that same area. So it goes like that. They go in every direction sideways using our trees. And once they're in, it's going to be case by case basis. However, as I'll mention a little bit, sometimes certain buildings, depending on how they're constructed, if they do have a garbage chute that's, gravity fed from the top all the way down to a compactor room, the apartments on both sides of that chute will probably be most vulnerable to becoming infested, which I'm going to talk about later, because the garbage chute dynamic just by itself is absolutely a critical infrastructural item that must be addressed if we want to control rodents in these buildings. And it cannot be fixed with baits or traps or poisons or anything. It's all about the garbage chute. And the plumbing tree, of course, is connected, as we all know. Every apartment's going to have a sink, a bath, a toilet, and all of that's going to be supported by our drains, our hot water, our cold water into the utility chase wall. Sometimes we call a wet wall, and those would go from top to bottom. Now, the rodents don't get inside the pipes. They don't fight inside these pipes like they might within a sewer system down in the street, but they travel up the outside of the pipes. They're built for climbing those shapes because they originated in jungles and areas full of trees and limbs and vines. So their feet are meant to climb thin, narrow surfaces, whether it's tree branches or it's pipes. It's ideal. And they'll go from apartment to apartment. Now, as we'll talk about, if this is not sealed correctly right here and right here, they will simply climb, come out here, forage on that apartment to see if anything is available in this apartment. Are there any rewards? And if not, back up here, go upstairs or downstairs and try it again and again and again until they find which apartments offer the best resources. So, of course, we don't have to go far to see how it goes with the drains and the sewer lines and the laterals and so forth, as well as look to the right, you see a crack directly to the outside. And on top of that, we see concrete hollow block. So we had this recipe with our apartment buildings for especially those that are of the level of affordable housing, public housing, and costs were a factor in how much to spend on these and to what level and so forth. But right here, you're looking at a recipe. That's why I took the picture, because serious problem in this building of the rodents take advantage of any gaps we give them, both literally and figuratively. Here's high up in a unit where I'm pulling the plates off the radiator at the top, because down below, following my arrow from a report and this kind of thing, that whole area was filled with mouse droppings, of which nobody was even aware of. Meanwhile, people were sitting in the living room inhaling all the fragments that are blown out of that area into their own air, not only allergens, but what else? What viruses, what bacteria, So it's a case they're going to follow the system. And here we're in the compact room down in the basement of affordable housing. And of course, the compactor room and, any place generating garbage and the odors. And we all know every day, all of us will be cooking dinner tonight. We know what that means is if you don't take the garbage out and you have a salmon dinner tonight or something, that has odors to it. It's going to be a monster magnet for attracting rodents both to the building and to the walls where those odors are originating. So our big number one inside, that guy, if we look at it, once it's in, it's important to take a closer look now. Well, what happens when it gets into an apartment? Where do we go from here? Once now it's in the building, it's traveled the various pipes and gotten in and out of things and so forth. And eventually and commonly it ends up in apartments. So once inside that apartment, the most desirable real estate, if the mouse could talk to us, they'd say, yep, we want the kitchen. We want to live in the kitchen. That's where our high-end real estate is. That's where our high-end condos are located, is the kitchen. Now, I'm not going to take us through each one of these, each slide. Just wanted to show the big picture that if someone says, where do they breed inside apartments? Well, there's very good opportunists. But over the years, we know through good research that it's a big 7. Warm wall voids behind stove and sinks, the canyons and caves and yellow caves, as I'll come back to, of the kitchen. They live in furniture voids right below our butts when we're sitting relaxing or watching TV. They live below the warm floor voids beneath radiators. Cluttered boxes are absolutely one of the worst things, for it to have a lot of boxes shoved beneath beds or into closets or any place. Rodents, mice in particular, love the feel of cardboard. It's a natural for them. It absorbs their body odor, absorbs their pheromones. They can use it for nesting. It wicks away moisture if there's any moisture in their bodies. So cardboard and boxes and cluttered boxes will be their own apartment complex for them, for their populations. Pantry boxes out of reach and forgotten, that spice box someone put up there in the top shelf and forgot all about it and what have you, they'll move into it. And finally, wall voids in the sheetrock studding walls of any room or closet. So they can breed in all these places and they do it very well. From there, they leave sebum, their droppings, and their urine. And by the way, the sebum is their body grease. It's an oil, the same as we produce sebum. You and I produce sebum out of your sebaceous glands in your skin, and that's that oiliness that when you rub your forehead, you'll feel. They're mammals. They produce the same kind of sebum. They're mammals, same out of their skin, and so that's all of that's left everywhere. Now the kitchen mice, once they're in, I'm just going to quickly: kitchen appliance mice, kitchen sink cabinet mice, kitchen wall mice, and pantry mice. That's the big picture. And these are out of my publications, but each one has its own mouse ecology, if you will. How they use stoves, how they use the refrigerator. They literally can move into those appliances, as I'll show you, right? So most people are shocked when we take apart a stove and mice come running out of the side panels where the insulation is, and all this time they've been cooking and in the kitchen and doing things with food, and mice are right next to the stove. They can't live in the stove with the oven, of course, it's too hot, but they can live, beneath the plates and so forth. So they live behind and within those appliances, and they live beneath, many times the sink cabinet voids. So if we take a look at an apartment, right, it's all here, right here in this small apartment in one of the apartment complexes. You have the refrigerator, your dishwasher, you have the sink with its cabinet, and down below you'll see its base. You have the stove, and behind that you have the stove voids connecting to cabinets with their own voids on the far right, which touching a wall that's hollow sheetrock. So right here, you can support 8 to 10 families of mice right in this zone. Very, very common. And people say, well, the mice are, they seem to be all over. And sometimes when they come out, they're all over the kitchen. In fact, this is Susanna Reese that, I mentioned earlier from, Cornell. We're working together in a particular project, and you'll see that stove, I put a star, a blue and red star in that. Because if you you can lift up that burner plate top here. You can actually, it has a little spring on both sides, a little spring mechanism, so you can get below and clean. The mice will live right below this platform in the void. There's a small void there, about 3/4 of an inch. They literally will live here while people are cooking down below. And at night, they will emerge out through many times the hookups here for the electrical grids. And people say, I always see them around my stove. That's because they're living in your stove. And the side panels that are insulated to hold in the heat from the oven and the broiler pan and all those kinds of things. So once the mice move in, they're so small and they don't require much space at all. They'll do the walls, they'll do the floors, they'll do the appliances, they'll do the cabinet bases. They will escape us in many different ways as to where they're actually, quote, coming from. But when you see them regularly, they're residents. They're sharing the apartment with us. So these appliance canyons and caves, we go back to our slide here. Those are my arrows showing you the canyons and the caves, the red being below everybody's kitchen cabinet, unless it's something very unique, but usually kitchens, there's going to be cabinetry, there's going to be a void. So the plumbing can disappear and into the floor and so forth. That's a cave for the rodents, for roaches and mice. Although if roaches move into a mouse-infested cave, the mice will eat those roaches for protein. And so over here we have this canyon. This is what I call canyons, and roaches will develop in there, and the mice in the back of this, they will squeeze themselves many times in and out of this space and run. This is their tight space. Say a cat was chasing them, they'll disappear into that space, right between that canyon. So it's our plumbing tree again, of course, in the kitchen, that floor to floor, apartment to apartment, parallel, sideways, vertical, they'll follow our kitchen plumbing trees. There's a close-up of that canyon. These are pictures I took out in the field, but, I'm just showing that canyon. Rarely does it get cleaned thoroughly for many people. For many, it's just hard to get to. And so over time, it builds up some greases, and someone spills the spaghetti sauce and down it goes, and so forth and so on. And that arrow is pointing, if you'll notice, to this darkened smudge space on top of this, quarter board right here, this corner, and all that's mice. This is all mouse sebum. All of this is mouse sebum. And that space was loaded with mouse droppings and urine in the kitchen. So if we pull out the broiler plate from beneath an oven, and I'm showing pictures that are common for, scenarios that I've been involved with, and probably most of us, I don't know, have been involved and seen this when you go out into the field. But you'll notice you pull that out completely from the oven and look to the left, you will see all the insulation being dropped down along the support grid here. This is the insulation that's supposed to be controlling and containing the heat of the oven and the broiler when we use those. That insulation is being all ripped out because the rodents are living in the walls and they got it out of their way. And they're also keeping what they want in their wall space for their own nest. So a bit of a close-up. And actually, this is a different apartment, believe it or not, but it's so similar. It's so common that people are shocked as they're living in my stove. They're coming from the stove. Yep, the stove, your refrigerator, your dishwasher, it's all being used as mouse houses. And so you'll notice my red arrow here. This is all stained from the mice constantly urinating onto it. This is all mouse droppings, all these mouse droppings. Someone threw a glue board under there as if that's, and called it. They actually checked off a box saying, all right, apartment 22C was treated. Holy cow. So, we'll talk about that. And I'm like, treated? What was treated? So you'll notice my green arrow. It's someone trying to block, thinking they're all in the walls. They must be coming out of a little hole, which some could. But this is foam blobs, which is the worst thing anybody could do, is that, right? If you're going to actually go to that space and try to do it correctly, it's the last thing you would want to do is that. But it sure is quick, sure is easy. And, it comes out of that can awful fast, and like a monster, it just expands right before your eyes. You'll see the glue boards over here stuck to the wires from previous, quote, treatments. So, this one caught and that's a juvenile. You wouldn't know that, but it's a juvenile mice, a different apartment, same scenario, right? You can see more of the foam blobs, same scenarios, completely different apartment. And this is a juvenile. The reason that's important is if you see a baby mouse or a baby rat, you're within 10 feet of the nest in a radius. Whenever you see a juvenile rodent, you're very close to the nest. Just like us, we don't let our young children stray far from the house when they go out in the yard to play or get on their bike for the first time. It's like, you must stay close for protection. Rodents, so that's a giveaway when you see a young one is okay. And in fact, my guess from my report on this particular case is that was a major breeding wall for the mice. So we saw the sebum and the droppings, but my point is, you're not going to see the urine, right? For the most part, unless it's reacting with something. But when I do my audits, inspections, and what have you, of course, I use a black light that fluoresces the urine. And that is a game changer, because then you'll get to see just how pervasive these animals are inside our buildings. Even when I travel, I stay in all kinds of hotel rooms from 1-star up to 5-star. And even my 5 stars, I'm taking out my black light and I black light my hotel room. Sometimes it's a bit unsettling. Sometimes I'm back down to the front desk. I want a different room, please, and don't want to get into it, but I just want a different room. And they'll give it to you if they have it. If not, trouble. But at any rate, then we have heating register mice, one of the most pervasive areas for the mice inside apartments. All of that black staining you see here in this apartment, again, showing you pictures across a wide array of pictures over the years and even recently, that's all mice. And the reason it's there is because that's where the pipe comes up. That's where the heating pipe comes up out of the tree from a floor below and connects with the heating register. And they're down below, they follow that pipe itself, and they come up to the kitchen on a regular basis for here, because this apartment provides regular food for them in this case. So similar scenario, my yellow arrow is pointing to all the sebum and filth and urine and feces behind an appliance within a kitchen. Again, someone put out a glue trap, a pest control contractor thinking, hey, I just treated this apartment. And all of that in the back, all that filth, all that horrible filth is not dust. It's not dust. That's all, everything from mice. That's their grease smears. That's their urine, feces, hair, everything just sitting around, volatilizing, if you will, into the air, of which people are living. Again, back to the worst thing people could do, but this is real. This was a superintendent that said, yeah, I plugged them up. I tried to do the best I could, and I plugged up all the openings. And so I went through a case of foam, and I was just like, well, okay, it's a Band-Aid, but they will go through that foam very quickly. They'll be actually appreciative to us that we used foam, because it conceals them even more and gives them more space to, they'll chew through this and use the foam because it's so insulative as their own pillows in their own beds. So it's just number one most common mistake I see is that use of foam to keep rodents out. So that's all has to be undone. That has to be undone and redone correctly. So now undoing that is labor intensive. Plus, you cannot get a good sealant after that to adhere very well. So we've actually made it worse by doing that. So here we have a radiator, of course, and I point this out because the radiator has its own steam pipe. It's a steam radiator, obviously, and it has its own steam pipe, which goes into the floor, and there's an escutcheon. It's called an escutcheon plate. We'll come back to that. And it's not sealed, so the mice were finding their way through there. And where do mice love to live in apartments? Right below, because mice must be near warmth, otherwise they die. So right here below here is the mouse nest. And once you get a family, they'll have one family here, another family over here, another family over here, and you'll have, 30 mice in a blink coming up through that one opening. So I mentioned there'll be box clutter mice, the typical scenario where human beings were famous for our boxes. It's as important to us probably as the wheel. So, we take our boxes with everything and we use them for everything, and we forget about them in spaces and we shove them places. And over time, if they sit stationary, mice and rats learn. This box of cardboard, which I love, has not moved since I've been here as a new rodent. And they will learn which are the stationary, undisturbed boxes and move into them. What's more is they're smart enough, and they are smart, they will go to the backs of the boxes to put their holes. They're not going to put their hole here in front of you or in front of anything, or in front of the cat, in front of a predator. Eons of time says, put your front door in a place that's not visible. So right in front of us, as we're working, what have you, the mice will be right in front of our nose, as the saying goes, breeding. And we'll be going about our day thinking, we got to maybe put out some traps on the floor for these mice. It's like, well, okay, but actually the whole issue is to go box by box in your clutter, in your closets, or whatever it's going to be, to take care of that. This is out of a box, area, and that's a litter. It's a litter of mice. And you'll notice, by the way, the typical house mouse has 5 pups per litter. But check this out: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And what's this? This is a different litter. And in fact, we call that the babysitter. They will use babysitters. These animals cannot generate their own body heat. If they remain unattended to by a warm body, they will die if mom does not get back to them in time to preserve their body heat. They will die as pups. But if you leave a babysitter with them generating, it's not yet themselves. Think of how we use our own children and say, okay, after school, you got to stay with the kids till we get home from work. That's what this is. So it's very amazing animals in this regard. Is now mom can spend more time foraging for food or nesting material. And all that nest there, by the way, was collected piece by piece, including dental floss is in here, to build a good nest when I discovered this. They'll move into furniture, very common. I take this picture, but it's representative. There were mice and different families of mice occupying piece. This had one family of mice over here, had another over here, down here below had another. And sometimes it'd say, after we get up and we go to bed and turn off the TV set, but maybe then come out a half hour later to get a glass of water or something, the mice are running on top of the couch. That's because they're couch mice. Those mice, just like the stove mice, they're foraging about their territory, seeing if you ate a popcorn or snack while you're watching TV or something. And so they know that you drop things watching and you snack and, whatever it may be, oatmeal cookies and milk. So then let's move over to the rats, right? We're going to leave the mice alone for a little bit and talk about the rats, which is similar but very, very different in terms of the animal because of its size. It's so much bigger, and it doesn't have the luxury of disappearing as easily, say, and living in a couch without being discovered or these kinds of areas. So that animal, this is the one that gets all the press, like I said, and unfortunately, the mouse almost gets no press. It's just not shocking enough. The ho-hum is just a mouse. But if a rat moves into a restaurant or somebody's apartment or a school or something, it can make the front page news. Not to mention it when they attack children or the elderly in their beds. I took this picture. It's coming out of an affordable housing area, and it's, by the way, my pictures are not just represent, I've been in affordable housing all over the country, right? So none of this is a reflection of affordable housing of New York City per se. I just want to stress that. And so I spent a long time up in Canada, just not too long ago, going over this. So, but affordable housing, public housing can be particularly prone for all kinds of sociological and budget constraints and so forth over the years. These rats were literally coming out of this person's apartment. This was the first floor in this case. And there were people on the sidewalk chatting about. And I said, do you see the rat coming out of the wall? Oh, yeah, that particular apartment, we know it has a problem in there. And, we don't know what's being done about it, but that's not uncommon to see them come and go out of that window. I was just like, holy mackerel, we need to do something now, right now. We need this minute, stop and do something, right? So, and it wasn't that building. But on the outside, rodents will live in burrows right up against the foundations. You'll see those poison boxes around the bait stations, and they'll burrow beneath the foundation itself. In fact, they'll go below the footing of that foundation wall that you see and emerge into the crawl space from below the footing. Super common. And if we give them food, which in this case, that's exactly what's happening, unfortunately, even though that's going to be collected not too far away, just a couple of hours, but nevertheless, if food is put out there every single day at the same time, the rats will learn whether it's day or night. They're not going to care. They like it. But if it's a daytime feeding, we'll take it. If it's a nighttime feeding, we'll take it. Preferably, you leave them out all night. That's what we'd like. We don't want to be seen, but we'll also do it during the day. To the left there, behind the green fence, is an alcove, a garbage alcove, where all the refuse is staged within there, piled really high, and the garbage trucks come by and they collect it. Well, those are all rat burrows, of course, fresh rat burrows. There's a broken bait station that got all smashed up, is just laying about. But those are all very active burrows right now. And the reason I know that is all the soil is marked with their urine and their grease and their smears. Once you see dark, freshened oil around rat burrows, it means it's very active, very, very active. So, there's a close-up. They'll put the burrows into asphalt itself, where it's not well made and well designed. That's a very fresh burrow right there below that sidewalk. So again, the rats are the same as the mice. They will use our buildings once they move in every direction. They get into bigger spaces. So they can't fit in those same nooks. You can't have rats living within the stove walls per se, like the mice. But the rats will move into the walls and the ceilings. They will travel up and down and live within the compactor chutes, depending on the chute's design and so forth. These are rats coming up and going up and down, literally, when I took their pictures, one after the other, coming out of the utility chase for all the cabling. So all this cabling was in the wall. The rats would just emerge. This is all rat. All this is rat staining on all these cabling and wires, what have you. And they would just simply climb to the next level, to the next floor or down. Same exact thing as I mentioned with the mice. They use the same plumbing tree. I'm putting my camera inside. This is like 3 weeks ago, just visiting an apartment complex with a severe rat problem. And I just put my camera and dropped it on a cable where I could take the picture from a distance, and went on a journey through the wall and took pictures. And this is just representative, but you see all this staining. This is the inside of the wall, right? Inside, all this staining that you see here and over here and all over these support tiers, cross tiers and vertical tiers, that's all from rat urine and feces. The walls in this area were just alive with rats. And so that's the noises we hear from sitting down nearby. And, they're scrabbling about and climbing, and they're gymnasts, and they're really great at it. Kind of one of the, as I started out, I mentioned, especially for some of the older buildings and what have you, when we have old trash chutes, where we simply put the concept should be, I guess, is you just pull down the drawer here and you put your trash. Hopefully it's a small enough size that can easily fall to the compactor, but it doesn't quite go like that, and so some people will stuff a bag of trash in there on the 10th floor, and it's 24 floors. So everybody from 10 on up to 24's trash is going to be stuck in the chute. And if we go back to this, and the rats are in the walls that connect to the ceilings will be a highway to the chute, of which they will access on every single floor of the trash traffic jam and feed liberally on anything that's in the food bags. Sometimes people will still stuff pizza boxes in that zone. Amazingly, they'll put a pizza box in there and they'll fold it up. They stuff it, well, it fit, and then it opens up the pizza box when it's in there and causes the same traffic jam. So this is me again, putting my head and body and my camera on a cable into the trash chute. This happens to be an old one that's still used, and it's brick. And I want to pay particular attention to right here. That's an opening through the brick into the side walls of the cavity itself, to the whole infrastructure. You'll notice how dark, very dark this is. Sorry, and that's from the stain of rats coming and going. They can climb bricks so quickly, so easily, so can mice. So the chute itself and the channel of chutes, if they're not maintained and kept orderly and repaired, which is not easy, the chute itself will become a rat and mouse reservoir. So if we follow it all down, as I mentioned earlier, you end up many times, since this is where it all accumulates eventually and gets emptied into bags, and then bags into dumpsters and dumpsters out for collection. Well, these walls are all hollow. Sometimes, there's stud, classic wood stud and sheetrock. Sometimes the covering here, the sheetrock covering, covers concrete hollow block. And so behind this, you will have apartments for the rodents in the concrete hollow block, and taking advantage of all of that. So if you rip some of that apart, you will see all this is rats, and leaving their grease marks as they come and go in behind the scenes kinds of areas. This is all rats. There's nothing else that causes that and causes these travels other than the smears off of the bellies of rodents. So then it takes work to get at the sources of these things, tremendous amount of work, identifying sources, identifying areas that patchwork has to be done and special construction has to be done. Otherwise, and I'm with these guys when I took their picture, we were looking and analyzing a fairly old system here, but it was very, very ratty in a city out closer to the west. So it's one of those deals where these rats can really take advantage. Now I'll show you a video of how the rats travel the chutes. This is a rat going up the outside of a new chute through the same chase, the refuse chase, right? These rats up and go on a commute, just like you and I go to commute and work commute. Now, if you watch that rat, if I go back here and show it again, if you watch this rat, he's traveling, they're traveling the cable. He's going to actually get off in between floors. There's the floor ceiling void of an apartment here. He actually makes a left and gets off and goes in there. Right. So, but that's what they do daily on their highways, just like we do daily on ours for different reasons. So let me move this forward into the ceilings using cams. I do a lot of camming, a lot of using night vision on my cams, wildlife cams, and you put them up, set them up, just put them right into the ceiling areas of any place you want, your own house. You put them in your basement, put them in your attic, see what's making noise. But this is a very healthy rat, and it's on high alert. And notice the tail is straight up and out. People say, oh, they drag their tails. Well, not really. Not when they're foraging about and they're on high alert. That tail is straight back off the ground. It's also a male. You can tell this is a male, right here with the testicles and scrotal sac and this kind of thing. Maybe more information everybody wants to know, but that's what it is. And the reason I even mention is for every male is a female. It's a 1-to-1 sex ratio. So if someone finds a male in a snap trap or some kind of dead in a bait station or something, it's like, okay, for every boy there's a girl, for every girl there's a boy. So depending on how many you find in traps and what have you, can almost calculate, where they are. So again, with the rats now, they don't have the options because of their space, but they will infest walls and cavities in those same kitchens if given the chance. If they get in, they'll live in the wall. They may not live in the stove, but they'll live below in the caves and these kinds of things. And by the way, if rats move into an apartment and there's mice already in there, the rats will viciously attack and kill and get rid of the mice. So where you have rats, you're never going to have mice, with the exception of if it's extremely untidy and dirty and there's so much food that the rat says, I don't have to bother chasing mice. They can have plenty. We both have plenty. So let's just get along peacefully. But as soon as it's a case of, they have to both forage for a living, the rat's not going to tolerate that. This is behind a refrigerator in one of the units. And this is a rat nest in the back of the fridge. And what's fascinating about this picture is this is all poison bait. It's called soft bait that the exterminator used. And the rats didn't eat the bait, but they liked the fact that it really were like pillows, truly like pillows. So they collected the soft bait and sat on top of them and foraged about with the other foods, which they'll do almost every time. If they have established food source, they don't usually touch the exterminator's baits. This is a rat nest in the wall, just like the mice I mentioned, but bigger scale. So we dug it out. We pulled off the coving, the cheap plastic coving, coverings here. That's a rat hole right there. The rat nest was right inside. We pulled out as best as we could everything in their nest. There were face masks in there. There were bottle caps. I don't know if they were collecting things for like bling bling for their cells or whatever, but it was all kinds of objects. Just, they'll hoard things like pack rats. So if we look at all of that, now we talk about what's our needs. I have here, not to be facetious, I would never do that, but our needs are not to put out more bait boxes around perimeter walls. That's the critical thing. Even though, as you can see, I write here, visually it appeals to the tenants and administrators also that, hey, we're doing something for this rodent problem, right? Look at all those exterminator boxes. See, we got something going. Well, for the interior resident rodents that I just described, that just by itself, zero impact. The rodents will live on and keep reproducing while something, quote, is being done, but not really anything is being done. So the big picture on needs is we need detailed exterior sanitation programs. And I'm very specific with the word detailed. A lot of times it's like, yeah, you take care of the garbage. Okay, got it. The goal is not to reward any animals, any rodents that show up at a property for the first time to say, this was worth visiting this property. As soon as they are rewarded, that's what starts the whole thing. A reward. It's almost like giving your dog a reward when they behave well. If you say sit and it sits, you give it a little dog treat. And you're like, hey, you know what? I'm going to sit every single time you use the word sit. So it's about rewards. Secondly, exterior pest exclusion. The materials and for all the pipes, cable penetrations, the doors, as we'll talk about, the interior, that has to be detailed also for the program occurring in any refuse rooms, compactor rooms. The interior, the apartment door has to be excluded. It's simple operation to a professional, but it should never be done if someone's not experienced in putting on a rodent strip. We're not talking weather stripping. And finally, as I just really emphasized, we cannot overlook the garbage chute if there is that system being used. It is a major contributor to rodents exploding their populations out of sight, out of mind into ceilings and walls. Continuing on, number 6, apartment level pipe seals have to be taken care of. Of course, we need cooperation from the tenant. We need cleanliness, we need clutter control. And if we do not get that cooperation, one apartment on a floor can infest neighbors above them, below them, and on all sides of them. Now, to me, in my career, I found that of the 11 items I'm listing here, number 7 is the most difficult to achieve. Because research has shown anywhere from 20 to 25% of any human population living in a city, under any houses, suburbs, apartments, condominiums, co-ops, you name it, 20 to 25% of us as a species just simply do not grasp the importance of keeping our own nest clean. That's a lot of people. So if you have 100 apartments in one building, 25 of those apartments are going to actually be problems for cockroaches, for bed bugs, for rats, for mice. Difficult. Anyway, number 8, services of a trained in-house or contracted pest professional. The last thing we want is someone to run in with a bunch of equipment like that glue board below the stove and say, oh yeah, I treated 6 apartments today and I treated them all for mice, or I treated them all for rats. The question is, what specifically did you treat? How did you do it? And tell me exactly what was done. And maybe I'll go back with you to show me 2 of your apartments that you treated to see how it was done. Because if someone's running in and throwing out a glue trap underneath something, or even a couple of snap traps behind something, that's got to be done professionally. Can't be done with like put a little peanut butter on a snap trap and voila, I treated to keep the rodents down. Number 9, we have to track data. We actually have to do that so we can zero in on where the breeding hotspots are within one building. Because those hotspots, if they're not targeted with specifics, they will continue to reinfest a building after all the work is spent depopulating a building. So we don't want to harvest rodents like corn, where it grows back every season. We harvest, it grows back. The goal is to sustainable rodent control in affordable housing. Let's do it right, and get to the root causes, and then do the best we can in maintaining a low level of rodents. But as I mentioned earlier, number 10, some apartments will be breeding centers affecting those above, below, and side of them. Those have got to be dealt with by whatever means and whatever paperwork and whatever cooperation. And these are public health threats. It's not as simple as someone, not letting people in because, they're talking too loud or they're playing their music too loud. This is public health affecting others in the same building. And finally, apartments parallel to the garbage chute, if there is one, often track the highest activity. And that, again, has to be addressed. Now, I'll just ask the crew supporting it, is there any questions at this point that we want to insert, or do we want to wait till the end?
I have a couple come through.
Right.
One of them being, the question is, are the audible so-called rodent deterrents effective? They claim to emit random audible signals that mice do not like, so they allegedly repel mice, but humans can't hear the device's sounds.
Right, great question. So those materials, those gizmos, have been around for about 40 years. And there's not a single research paper ever published to show they have any effectiveness in what we're talking about right here. But if you use those machines in laboratory tests and you set up a test where rodents have a choice to run against them down a little corridor versus a corridor without them, they'll pick the corridor without them. But in the real world, they've never been shown to have any effect whatsoever. And if they did, you can imagine, why would we be spending all this professional time when all we'd have to do is plug something into the wall and voila, it's taken care of. So no, I don't advise using those products.
Okay, thank you. There's also a question from earlier on that is asking if it's true that wires or wire coverings are more and more being constructed out of food-based products like soybean oils. And then if so, if there's anything being done to limit those types of products being used.
Right. So there has been a lot of attention on what's called bio-based wires and rodents, chewing on those, if you will. And there's been allegations that that's causing an increase in the chewing on the wires. And I've been consulted on that many times. I will tell you that there's no proof either on that, just because it's a simple link that now going from rubber materials over to a bio-based synthetic covering of the wires is calling in the rodents to gnaw on the wires. Rodents have been gnawing on wires ever since we, quote, invented them with all kinds of coverings that we put over those. They look like stems to them, and whether or not it's a bio-based or non-bio-based, they'll have to prove somehow in a court of law and through good sound science that that's causative relationship. And I don't subscribe to it, only because I've seen every type of wire in the world gnawed apart by rodents. And bio-based or not bio-based, I think it's just the shape of those objects. And they say, oh, I wonder what's in this plant stem. And so they go for it.
And then there's just one more quick one. It's asking, how common is rabies in rats?
Thank you. Very important question. The good news is rats and mice do not carry rabies at all. So that's a clear. So if someone does get bitten by a rat, for example, and it draws blood and so forth, you won't have to go through the rabies treatment, which I've actually been through myself, but not for rodents, but they're bitten by bats. So rodents don't carry that virus. So there's no threat whatsoever. But having said that, if you are bitten by a rat, you definitely need medical attention. It needs to be monitored because there's bacterial infections that can occur and diseases such as rat bite fever appropriately that might be present in the saliva of the rodents. But at least it's not as extreme as contracting rabies and the rabies treatments.
That is good news. That's all we had now. So we'll catch up at the end.
Okay. All right. So let's look at solutions. Where's our best hope going forth into this complex conundrum? I've used that word several times because it is a conundrum in many different ways when you dive into all the things that affect rodents and affordable housing. But nevertheless, there are solutions, and if we look at this, controlling rodents within any apartment building, but especially affordable public housing, of their size and their mode, right? Particularly their mode, in yellow, requires this three-way partnership. Absolutely begins with the property management. They have 40% share in this. The tenant I'd also list as 40%. And finally, the contracted or in-house exterminator, but only 20%. Now, the interesting thing about the dynamic over the years is number one and number two often will just simply deflect and say, well, just get an exterminator. That's what they're there for. That's what they do. They kill vermin. They kill rats and mice. So hire them. Tell them to put out some traps and poisons. They're the ones that got the good stuff. That's not the way it works. I was an exterminator for 3 years full time, saving money for college in New York City. And everyone thought, do your thing. I don't know what you have to do, but do it, And the fact of the matter is, they don't have magic wands. The pest control industry doesn't have magic wands to immediately keep them out of buildings where the doors aren't been pest proof by the property owner. Now, you could hire them and they'll do the pest proofing for you because they are experts in that. And we don't have magic wands. If someone's only cleaning their apartment once every 2 weeks, and they figure, well, just put out some traps and take care of them. And that's what we're paying you for, is to go into that tenant and put out traps. Traps will never work in competition with abundant food spills and garbage and untidiness and clutter and so forth. So the contracted exterminator is actually very, very important. But they're third in a row. So I'm not going to show you a lot of text here, but every once in a while, I want to show a monthly exterminator request sheet posted in the mailroom may or may not fulfill the obligation of the landlord to provide protection from pests, which they're obligated to do, right? Almost by every law and every coda, with very few exceptions. However, unless the building itself and the apartment has been rodent-proofed by the property management. Now, we're not talking independent condos here, where people are responsible for their own particular condo apartment, and that's on them. This is different. But the building itself, the outside doors, the outside envelope, all the ways into that building, and the apartments, to protect people from getting public health disease and so forth, they're supposed to be proofed by the property management. And that's not putting on the weather strip, as we've assumed. The trash chute and its structural channel must be kept in good repair if there is such a trash chute, and it has to be cleaned regularly so as not to be a food source. Rodents will lick the grease, scrape the grease off the sides of channels, and even the tubular metal ones if they're not taken care of. So, and finally, the tenant maintains a reasonably clean and orderly apartment. In other words, clutter and small food bits will sustain house mouse issues that can spread to the bordering apartments, one on top, one below, on both sides. So we just want to be realistic as to, for many, many years, there's been this model of, we'll hire a monthly exterminator, and during the month, if you see something, cockroaches or ants or flies or rats or mice, sign up downstairs. It's right in the mailroom. Just put your name on it, and the exterminator will come to your apartment. They will. As soon as you sign up, we guarantee it. But the reality is, well, okay, one is just 1 week longer waiting for that exterminator to show up with a mouse or two mice in the apartment ends up with hundreds and hundreds of more droppings, thousands of more urine points, both of which could be harmful. And we feel like, okay, the monthly visit will take care of this. That exterminator cannot solve that problem unless number 1, 2, and 3 are taken care of. There's no way. So, but if we start with solutions, pest exclusion, for 16 years, I wrote this on a blackboard for my students at the university. I said, look, pest exclusion is pest prevention, and pest prevention, of course, is public health. And that's why it's called the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Even though we call it the CDC, it's Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Prevention's public health. So a weather strip is not a pest strip. And the good news is, if you buy and put on a good pest strip, it also weatherproofs. So you get a double whammy. So if we look at any particular door, that has a weather strip on it, like this one right here, that hole has been chewed out. You can even see the tooth marks in that at the edge, and that's where they do it. You have to have an effective, not just a strip, not just a brush. There's approved rodent-proof brushes and sweeps, they're called, for the bottoms of doors. And you'll notice as the rodent went in, what did it do? All the way in, it marked it up, put down its pheromone to call all the other mice from that area to get in. There it is up close and personal. When I took these pictures, I just wanted to show you the tooth marks. Nothing else does that. Roaches do not do that. Ants do not do that. That's only rodent, and rodent. Sometimes maintenance shops will say, well, we're going to go get some really heavy duty, a thick vinyl. This stuff is tough and it's very thick. Well, that's what they did at this apartment complex. That's very thick, heavy duty vinyl. And he spent, drilling, securing it, the time to do that and everything. The first night, that carve out to the left, that was done by rats, the very first night. So I don't know how many thousands of pictures I have of doors with holes in them from rodents, but I'm not going to insult you by going through any more. But they come in all shapes and sizes. There's super cheap, there's cheap, and there's relatively cheap door sweeps out there and strips. But if we want to keep rodents out of affordable housing, it's got to be the right materials, right? There's our friend Matt Fry again, just pointing to the astrogal. It's like, and we cannot do the bases, but not do the astrogal. It has to be done correctly. And when they come and go, you'll notice, I point this out, they tell us that mouse entry, rat entry begets mouse and rat entry. All of this, as long as that stays there and this is like this, it will be a calling card for rodents, long rodent. It will be long rodent. That building will be subject to invasion forever thereafter until it's done right. So correctly excluding rodents, there are products out there, there's not many, and I'm not with anybody. I'm a consultant. I'm not on retainer with a single company for anything rodent control. I'm not with anybody for baits or traps or rodent proofing, nothing. I've never made my income by, aligning myself and putting a patch on my sleeve. Never. Right. It's strictly my services. So it's a case of this company was one of the first to ever come out and say, we have the materials and we have the technology. They've now been on the market about 15 years, relatively new, but this is what the food plants use, the pharmaceutical plants use, anybody that makes biochemical plants, it is the correct materials, right? So we have these door sweeps, nothing for the most part. We don't need to go into outliers. Occasionally there are some, but this material keeps rodents out. For the interior pipes and holes, right? We never want to use the foam, as I mentioned. We don't want to use cheap bathroom caulking. There's products, you go to the hardware store and it's baffling. You're like, my goodness, which of these do I need? 100% silicone, acrylic latex, lasts a lifetime. Do I need the premium 100% silicone sealant or the high performance, or the foam in the can? But I dare anybody to figure, you pick the one that is definitely the right one for you on your crevice or hole in the wall among just these products here. But there's 100 others that have similar confusing labels just to get you to impulse buy, right? So as I mentioned, I took this picture. They had a serious rat problem. When I got there, they said, well, we're working on exclusion, Bobby. We're trying to take care of it. So we started before you got here. I'm like, you should have waited, right? This is a Brillo pad stuffed by the superintendent into a hole, and he used shipping tape to close up the gaps and the breaks in the vent case itself. I'm like, well, not so much, but this person took pieces of brick and cement and put it into the hole and then used putty to try to hold them in place and then left the other gap completely open, and not so much. So if we have a concrete opening, like this is in the basement of an affordable housing complex recently, if the rodents can get into one block, they're in the whole wall because all the blocks connect, obviously. So every block leads to every other block, and they become their own apartment complex, as I mentioned earlier. And I have put my hand on walls like this, where the whole wall is warm. I can feel it, all the heat being radiated back through the porous concrete onto my hand because there's so many bodies packed into each of the channels of the concrete hollow block. Obviously, no brainer here, So this is the product available online to everybody. If you're going to use something to seal a hole or seal a crevice or take care of this is what the professional contractors that build quality buildings use for their sealant, right? It's a sealant. It is not a caulk, right? You'll notice it says high performance polyurethane sealant, Master Seal. Now there's another one called GeoSeal, GeoCeal. Either one, but you have to have something that's going to withstand all the challenges of sealing holes in apartment buildings. Now in the interior, we have pipes. That word underscored, pipe escutcheons, are as important as door sweeps. And escutcheon plates, right, with quality sealants, get the job done. So those are escutcheon plates. Probably everybody knows this, even in your own home. If you look below your kitchen sink, Hopefully you see escutcheons sealed, first shimmied on and then sealed with a little bit of a quality sealant to the wall. So rats and mice and bed bugs and ants and cockroaches cannot get through these and get into your kitchens and your bathrooms. If these are missing or right here loose, those pipes that I mentioned earlier, mice will travel them and come into apartments at will. And many times, so will rats. They'll just enlarge the opening with their teeth a little bit. Definitely bed bugs travel those regularly. Ants travel them and cockroaches travel them. But that excluded company, they sell kits now where you can get the kit. And this is actually a roll of it. Some people say, oh, that's steel wool like the hardware store. It is not. This is not steel wool like the hardware store. This is a specialized stainless steel fabric mesh made specifically for a lock and load mechanism of putting it into holes. And when the rodents try to dig it out or push it out, they get pokey pokes stainless steel fibers into their eyes and their face and their paws. And they learn very quickly, I'm stopping. And you'll notice for the installer, you have to wear gloves. If you touch this with your hands, and I have by mistake plenty of times, you regret it. And you'll be picking out little fibers out of your fingers for a while. So special scissors and so forth. That will never do. Will never do. Even though if you can't get to that spot for a couple of days and you're going to do it right at the weekend, will it do to hold you over for a couple of days to use the old-fashioned hardware, steel wool from the hardware store? Yes, if it's done really tight. But if you leave it there, over time, it will be shimmied out. Vibrations that you don't even realize are happening will shimmy that out, and or the rodents will push it out. And steel wool like that does not hurt them. Right. So underneath the sinks of every apartment, underneath the bathroom, underneath the kitchen, the gas line, anything that penetrates into the wall, floors, or ceilings must be sealed. Must be, because the rodents, as I showed when we started, that's their travel rats. So that's me looking down at in this case, actually a commercial kitchen line where mice were coming through a major gas line. So finally, let's talk about the 20%. The typical techniques of pest professional in affordable housing, it's sometimes they use traps, sometimes they use poison baits. But I want to stress there in yellow, neither of these are effectively used by tenants or even a building super unless they've been through some training, which some have. Some actually go and get some training, get a pesticide application license, which is a good thing for a super to have. Very good thing. But most say, oh, I've got this. It's pretty simple, right? Who can't plug a hole up, right? Well, who can't set a mouse trap? Well, most people don't know how to use a mouse trap correctly. There's different traps, and where do you place them? Which baits do you use? What angle do you put them to the wall? Believe it or not, at the university, I spent 4 years of my life doing research on mouse trapping and rat trapping. 4 years. Because there's a lot to the behaviors of how rodents interact with these devices. But the public's fooled into thinking, you just get a little peanut butter, put it on that Victor trap, put it out. And I've caught mice like that in the past. Yes, you have. But did you capture all the mice? Maybe if there was one, you got lucky. But it's like going fishing in a giant lake. Hey, look, I caught a big fish today. Yeah, do it again. Right. So it's a case of traps when they're put out in apartments where, especially if there's children or pets or anything like this, they should be put in either cardboard boxes, doesn't have to be a fancy plastic one like this, right? Or protect you. We don't want to ever put out a trap all by itself next to the refrigerator or something. Here's the other critical thing, the way it should be done. If there's a few mice, let's say 2 or 3 mice in an apartment, and you want to trap them and not use poison baits, this is what it takes. 2 beneath the sink, 2 behind the stove, 2 behind the refrigerator, 2 in closets, 2 to 4 in the living room furniture, 2 in the pantry, and 2 to 4 associated with box clutter. Most people will put out 1 or 2 traps for the same exact scenario if they're lay people. The trick to getting mice, if you are going to use traps, is to put out plenty and don't set them for 2 or 3 nights, but put the free bait on there using different kinds of food bait. Then going ahead after the mice say, oh, these new devices don't hurt us, because mice are really smart too, just like rats. They really don't hurt us. And then they will aggressively, the very first night after 2 or 3 nights, say, those were great. I'm going after every single one I can get to. The whole family will come out and follow each other, and they'll get their own trap for themselves. So I'm going to just skip ahead here. That, of course, is a snap trap by a radiator with an escutcheon plate and all those mouse signs. You'll notice to the far right over here, we have copper. It's called copper stuff it shoved into a hole. Mice easily will push that materials out, and they'll even pull on it with their teeth. It's so soft, what have you. So, but that's not a placement that we would want to put a trap. Even if there were no children or pets, when mice feel super exposed exploring new objects, they're very hesitant. Now, if that was in a hidden spot by some shadows in an area where no one can see them interacting with it, it'd be far more effective. Flue traps can be used, especially inside boxes and what have you, but in general, our research at the university showed a glue trap is the least effective of all the traps, even though it's the easiest to use and the quickest and also the cheapest for the pest professional to install. And by using that route, maybe they can keep the bid low and accept the low bid kind of thing. And unfortunately, accepting the low bid leads them to use low effective equipment, which now, are we getting rid of the problem or are we just harvesting? So, and plus they themselves can be a real pain to use, when they're put out in terms and they're getting stuck to things if they're not correctly used. Rodents can escape off them. Sorry to go back and forth. But what you see at the edge here of this glue board is lots of rodent hair stuck because they got committed a little bit, then pulled back and got away. And once they've had a bad experience with a glue trap, they never do it again. Right? That's a juvenile. We tend to capture juveniles on glues. Finally, poison baits. Never, ever, ever loose baits or blocks tossed behind appliances or on the sink or any place loose in any part of the building whatsoever. There's no exceptions to this. There's no, well, with one caveat, none of that. This is where lawsuits happen over and over again, So that case I showed you earlier, the reason those soft baits, those are all poison packets right there in blue. The reason the rat was able to do that is someone had thrown a whole bunch of these soft little sachets underneath sinks and behind things and just tossed them casually as if, well, nobody can get to where I'm tossing these. Well, the rodents will pick up those things, carry them. Sometimes they'll hear a noise, they'll drop them right in the middle of the floor. You'll have a child in the morning sitting on the floor, nibbling on what they thought was candy. And that's the situation. So this should never be done, where in the old days, decon right off the shelf, we used to have this. And, it'd be a case of you put out pellets like that and the mice will carry them and scatter them all over the place. You'll find them in beds, you'll find them in desks, you'll find them in drawers with silverware. They're hoarders. They're like tree squirrels burying acorns. They're both rodents with that behavior. So again, we can't not at least get back to saying, well, we don't have the magic wands for either pest proofing and or using traps and baits. And we cannot undo fighting against untidiness and sanitation, and nobody's going to declutter an apartment. But if the mice are in the boxes of that apartment in 5 or 6 different boxes shoved into closets, that has no solution whatsoever to it with baits or traps. Even though someone will say, well, I put out some snap traps and boxes inside that apartment. They let me in to do that, and I treated. And everyone will check that apartment's been treated. So we got that problem off our list. Well, we didn't really, but it has been treated. It just has not been addressed. So I'm going to stop here, you guys. I do want to show you one last thing with the baits for mice in particular. These are mouse bait stations. versus the big rat stations, which I'll show you. These are very good stations. A 300-pound person could stand on top of either one of these. They will not collapse them. They need simple little keys to open them up, and they're considered tamper resistant. In some cases, these can be put out, because if they're put out in inaccessible spots where a child can't get to them, and if they did get to them, they cannot open those RTUs. And I've tested these against chocolate labs as dogs, and with peanut butter and their favorite little licks food in there, and they could not get them open. So these have high protective qualities and very, very effective, but they must be put out in areas that they're not seen by children or pets, right? Here's one put out in a basement area, and over time it's getting dirty, but the fact of the matter, you open that up and the bait was very fresh inside. And there is mouse scratching into the block bait. Only block baits get put in those little bait stations. Only blocks, no pellets, no soft sachets, only blocks, right? Because they cannot get them out of those. Now, finally, and I know I've said that twice already, if we go back to looking and seeing those bait stations along this apartment complex here, those all contain bait. And that's okay. That's an effective treatment for foraging exterior rats that don't count to those baits, as long as the baits are kept fresh and the sanitation of the exterior dumpsters and bags and whatnot are not available to compete against those, because the baits will never win in that competition. So we open those boxes up, and that's what those boxes are right there. There's the mouse one in the middle, but the rat stations are on the left and on the right. Those, if put in the right spot and the food is eliminated from what the rats grew up on, they will readily feed on these baits, and they readily work very, very well. Okay. So, but I want to again stress, I would feel, negligent if I didn't. Anyone, a homeowner, super exterminator, anybody that tosses any bait behind things, that's illegal. You're not allowed to do any tossing. That is a legal and dangerous application of a pesticide. So, and there's also a material there called tracking powder, which I'm ending on. There's a material, this is a restricted use pesticide, meaning it's restricted because it's so toxic. And there are some companies that will say, look, they're not taking on baits very well. There's too much trash and everything. So we'll just put this dust. They'll call it dust, even though it's not dust. They'll blow it into the walls of apartments and in various boroughs all over the place. It's extremely toxic. And that should never be allowed. And you'll notice, never allow applications of this restricted use dust to walls, floors, ceilings where rodents come and go to occupied apartments to get their food. Because where that rodent goes with the powder on its body, so goes the poison powder. So then you can have baby carriages being wheeled through it. You can have dogs sniffing it. You can have it on the shoes of people. I once saw an apartment complex where someone put it through all the hallways of all things. The hallways were coated in that poison powder. Everybody was tracking it into their apartments. So we want to be careful of anybody that has a magic dust. Oh, it's our secret dust. We make it with our company. No, they don't, right? But they'll say, well, it works. It's very strong, so it works. And we got rid of the mice in that apartment complex. No other company could. Well, yeah, you want to make sure you get full copy of that. Here's my last slide. I just wanted to put up the weirdness that occasionally comes with working with rodents. This is in a supermarket that had a bad mouse problem. And I heard all this scratching on one of the aisles. And I traced back my scratching, and it was coming from behind a whole row of Friskies. And I gently pulled out all a box of Friskies to see what was going on. And I don't know, you tell me, but it seemed like the mice were attacking the throat of the picture of the cat on this Frisky box. I'm sure it's a coincidence, absolutely sure. At least I'm sure. But anyway, I was like, what are the chances of that going down like that? So deliberately, aggressively by the mice going after that part of the cat. But that's what it was. Okay, I'm done, you guys. I want to say thanks again. I hope hope we can all push the needle forward on rodent control for affordable housing and public housing. And I think I left a couple of minutes at least for any questions. And if we didn't, as was mentioned, they'll be posted on the blog, and I will answer every single question that comes in.
We did have one pop up back a few slides when you were talking about the baits. How many mice could those bait stations hold?
So the small stations, the little ones for the mice, hold only one block, but one block can kill 10 mice, right? So, because the mouse doesn't eat very much. It only eats about 2 to 3 grams every 24 hours. And those are 30-gram blocks. So you can get, pretty good kill if it's put in the right spot with a good bait, in areas where the food has been eliminated.
Does construction typically increase rodent problems in nearby buildings?
Yes, in general, it does, construction doesn't cause rodents, but construction will scare rodents, because down below our ground, outside of all of our streets, down below, we all walk by those, and we see the construction sometimes when streets are dug up for new sewers or water lines or what have you. Most cities abandon their infrastructure when they're no longer being used. Old pipes exist in all our cities by the millions, just abandoned there. We're allowed to do that by city code. It's too expensive to take it all out. So we put a new pipe next to the old pipe, and we leave the old pipe in place. Well, over centuries, a century or two, we now have millions of abandoned, empty pipes that rodents have moved into down below, right below our feet and our cars, and they use them as rodent highways and rodent nests. And so when jackhammers start up again nearby those areas, those rodents run for the hills. It's like hitting a hornet's nest with a stick. The hornets come flying out in all directions. So construction can cause rodents to stop being seen, depending on how many rodents are living in that particular street area.